what I would like to touch on, after that incredible, great presentation by Salman, is maybe going over some of the historical recent events. Up till 1989, probably 91, the main discourse used by the West at the time, because of the Cold War, all of that, was the anti-communist, basically anti-communist rhetoric. These overarching discourses that are deployed, we usually think of them as if they were some kind of, in the left especially, superstructure, okay? Or some kind of epiphenomenon, of something happening over there. But anyway, these discourses really are organizing principles of the global political economy, of the geopolitics, of the way they organize the system at large, military interventions. I mean, it goes over many, many things, all the way down to, even what is taught in a school, what kind of thing are being. So these are like really constitutive rather than representative of something else. So you could see this across the history in many ways. And I was mentioning this morning in the course and yesterday, how racism is an organizing principle of the political economy. Who gets what, how much they get for what they do, what kind of work you do. All of this is organized from within by racism, as well as sexism. And you could have there, all these organizing principles that are deployed, as part of, broader global colonial imperial designs. Up till 1989, 91, you have this, the anti-communist discourse deployed to basically justify certain amount of budgets and where the money of the budget goes, and that kind of thing. Suddenly, when the implosion of the Soviet Union happened, there was like a, 5 years vacuum there of what to do now when the anti-communist rhetoric is now gone. How do you keep building, business as usual, like they were doing over a long time, if the Soviet Union is now gone? And then you have all these different corporations invested in the military-industrial complex that live off basically the production of war, because as you know, weapons cannot be sold in supermarkets or in a mall, even though as much as in the USA, there is no restriction and people can go to a corner and get a gun. There are big weapons there, such as tanks, airplanes, and that haven't gone to the point of being sold in a corner. So you have the investment of very important actors in the war economy into war making. And when the Soviet Union was gone, so they depend a lot on the military budget of states, especially USA state have invested a huge amount of the proportion of the budget in this. And you have all these lobbies making sure that the budget keeps running in this way, okay? And of course, it doesn't matter how many people are killed, but if there's no war, you create a war because you need to sell the weapons. You need to empty the warehouse so that 10 years later, you can pass the bill to the Congress and say, we need to build more bombs. So if you build bombs and you don't throw them anywhere, then, we have the warehouses full. And then what are you going to do now? I mean, then you go bankrupt because you don't have any more production of weapons, of especially heavy weapons, you know. So anyway, so the point is that suddenly there was a crisis. What to do now? How to, in a sense, keep building the argument that the military budget have to continue in place and even growing if you have not anymore the enemy, such as the Soviet Union. And so suddenly there was a very interesting debate in the early 90s. You have, on the one hand, a debate about who is the new enemy. You have the Air Force of the Pentagon saying the new enemy is China. So let's, you know, we need to put all our efforts in preparing for a war against China. And of course, in a war against China, given the size of China and the population of China, the Air Force have the upper hand. So the piece of the pie will go to the Air Force. So the Army and the Navy were not happy about this. So suddenly you see people in the Navy saying, no, no, no. The enemy is the drugs, the drug cartels bringing drugs through the ocean and crossing the borders of USA through the ocean. And that's the role of the Navy. Now the Navy says, no, 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 this is the enemy. So they were, fighting about these things. Then the Army said, no, 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 wait a minute. You know, the problem here is all these people crossing the border, we have no control. We need to control these. And all this drug crossing the border through land, not through the ocean. So, and suddenly these people went into a battlefield of who is exactly the new enemy. All of this was basically how to reorganize, not as a representation, but as constitutive of the political economy, and how do you organize the budget of the USA in such a way that you keep, you keep the piece of the pie, on your side, okay? And this debate went on for several years. I don't know if many of you are younger, and maybe you don't even remember this or have seen this, but those of us who were at those times, right after the fall of the Soviet Union, they were going to this crisis about what to do now. And so suddenly here comes an article, a seminar article published by a Harvard professor. His name is Samuel Huntington, who then say, hey, wait a minute, there's no rush here, no reason why to fight each other about this. Here is the solution, clash of civilizations, right? And so he comes with the idea of clash of civilizations. And what we need to do, is the main enemy here is Muslim, the Muslim. The Muslim is the main enemy. This is a clash of civilization. And he went on and on about this. And of course, you might think that this is an academic professor. He just published this in a journal, and he just, another article in an academic journal. Well, it happens that Samuel Huntington was one of the main thinkers of the Trilateral Commission back in the 70s, one of the theoreticians of the idea that it's better to have dictatorship than democracies to save the interests of the United States, and on and on and on, okay? So this guy was a very influential thinker in the circles of the top political elites in Washington. So this idea went on, and of course, it reminded me of 19th century when the USA was trying to build a plan for how to make USA a superpower in the 20th century. And here there was a guy called Alfred Maham who was in charge of building that strategy. So this guy was sent to Bethesda in Maryland, where they have a naval base, and the guy was assigned to, okay, you go in there and study the British Empire, study and come with a plan. Okay, so this guy wrote a plan about how to go about building a strategy for, the U.S. empire for the 21st century. And if you read the books of Mahan, and I cannot go on detail about this, but it was amazing. The guy was, in the 1880s, calling for taking over the Puerto Rico, Cuba, Panama, Hawaii, Philippines, Marshall Islands, Palau Islands. I mean, you went over the map, and he was basically calling for this, you know, in the 1880s. Okay? And he was basically calling for taking over all these places because he thought that the strategy was to take over strategic military and trade routes in the ocean that will be important to control world markets. And he was basically looking at the British Empire as the model and trying to replicate that for the US Empire. So he said, we need to take all these places, build a canal in Panama, etc. So he went over all of this at the time when you try to find out where this, all these places he was naming, what were the political authorities there? You have Puerto Rico was a colony of Spain, Cuba was a colony of Spain, Hawaii was a native Pacific Islander kingdom or political authority. You have the Philippines, was a colony of Spain, the Marshall Islands, colony of Spain, Palau Island, the colony of Spain, Mariana Islands, a colony of Spain, Guam, a colony of Spain. Panama was a province of Colombia, and this guy was writing about taking over all these places, okay? So you say to yourself, oh, wow, these people are planning something here. And then you have someone like Theodore Roosevelt, who happened to write a dissertation, a master thesis in Harvard in 1892, that is called, the title of his thesis was Alfred Mahan. Okay, and I'm saying this because then you have 1898, the Spanish-American War. And we usually are kind of naive about these things because we always think, oh, this happened because the Maine, remember the fairy tale they gave us? There was an explosion of a naval ship in the Havana harbor, right? You remember the fairy tale they tell us in high school for American audiences, you know what I'm talking about. For non-American audiences, the rhetoric is that the Maine, this ship in the Havana harbor exploded and it was attacked by the Spaniards, and Theodore Roosevelt was the vice secretary of the War Department. At the time, it has a real name. Now it's euphemistic name, Defense Department, right? But at the time, it was the real name, War Department. And so this vice secretary was, he was in charge, and the question was, okay, who is going? We need to declare war now against Spain. And the funny thing is that 10 years, 12 years later, it was officially recognized that that boat imploded from within, that boat was never attacked by Spain, okay? So, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because the whole thing was to frame it in the public opinion as an attack coming from Spain and prepare the public opinion to basically go into a war against Spain and take over all the places that Alfred Mahan was already pointing 10 years before. Okay? And who declared war? Well, the Secretary of War Department was not ready to do it. He didn't agree with the plan. So the pressures were so high that they did a deal. The deal was, okay, I'm going to go out for 24 hours, okay, elsewhere, and the vice secretary is Theodore Roosevelt. You take over, and then you do whatever, okay? So he left for 24 hours, Vice Secretary Theodore Roosevelt took over, and then he declared war against Spain, okay? That's how it happened. And then you have the Spanish-American War, and then they took over all these places that I'm mentioning to you, with the exception of Hawaii, that they already took it a year before, okay? And the exception of Panama, that they went on with Panama in 1902, okay? It's a long story. I don't want to go into that. But if you look at American history and you start looking at how war-making strategies, you could see how these things are deployed. For example, you could see Second World War. We know today that they put all the naval force in Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, And the Japanese were looking at this and saying, are you going to attack us? I mean, we take this as a declaration of war, you know? And USA did not respond. They keep putting more ships there. Well, here comes another telegram from the Japanese. Well, we're taking this very seriously. They keep putting more. Well, you know, we're planning to attack you. They keep putting more naval ships there and more. Well, you know, we're going to attack you this day. The telegrams are there. Now all of this is classified. So the American elites knew even the day they were going to attack. But they were interested in provoking the attack because they wanted this to go into Second World War, entering from the Pacific front, while the Europeans were killing each other and coming to Europe later when expecting that Hitler would beat up the Soviet Union, and then coming to now take a weakened army, such as the Nazi army, and then take over. That was the idea. So they went to the Pacific first, and this strategy, part of the strategy was to use, provoke the attack from Japan. Then you have the case of Vietnam. In Vietnam, there was no attack from anybody, except that one day there was this American ship there in Tonkin Bay in Vietnam, and it was supposedly attacked, okay? It was, we know today, it was a CIA attack or a CIA plan, okay, to an American ship, okay, and they accused the Viet Cong. Then they came with this to the Congress and got unanimous vote to go into a war against Vietnam, right? Then you see the 7 Days War. During the 7 Days War, you could see that in the 7 Days War, they were basically, there was Israelis with the White House planning an attack to an American ship, intelligence naval ship in the Mediterranean, and accuse Egypt so that the US can enter the war against Egypt in the middle of the war with Israel, okay? But what happened? The war lasted 6 days, 7 days, I don't remember. And that was 67, okay? So the Israelis destroyed the boat was sinking, it killed 72 Marines there, okay? But the war was over. There was no time to declare war against Egypt. And so who saved the boat? The Egyptian army came and took the boat to Alexandria port, okay? Now there is a documentary about this where all the people who lived that experience are speaking out about this because they were all called to shut their mouth for national security reasons because they were all witness of how the Israelis were attacking them, okay? But the whole plan was originally to use this as a way to justify an attack of the USA in Egypt, okay? So then you have the Granada War. Remember Granada invasion, this island in the Caribbean? And then you have the thing, I'm from Puerto Rico, an island in the Caribbean, colony of the USA, and we used to know a year in advance where they were going to invade next. How did we know that? Because they were rehearsing the military practices and stuff like that. We will be rehearsing this. They will be rehearsing this in the island of Vieques, Puerto Rico, in the east coast of Puerto Rico. Okay? So, and they will put euphemistic names to the rehearsals. For example, in Granada, we were there in Vieques, and we were doing civil disobedience and trying to stop their practices and stuff like that. And this rehearsal was called Operation Spicy Island. Well, we knew that Granada export nutmegs, that the radio of Granada, of the revolutionary government in Granada, was called Radio Spicy Island. And so it was obvious. And the way they were doing the operation was very, very obvious. They were going there. We let them know a year in advance. They're going there. Get ready, okay, because they're going there. But then in the official press, later, they always find something to justify this, and what they used was this thing that there was an American university there, and then they said that the students were under threat by the revolutionary government and US have to intervene to save the students. When the students were taken to the USA, the press came to interview them, and then what happened? their declaration when they come away, well, I was in the beach studying for an exam, and I don't know why we were taken away. So they have to take the microphones away from their mouth because he was dismantling the whole thing, okay? And hide them from the public because they would start talking. I was in the beach, really. They were with tents, very well, nobody was tortured or killed or anything, and suddenly, boom, they have to take away the microphones because the whole thing was, but they were planning this way back, okay? So suddenly, the Cold War is over. Suddenly, you have Mr. Huntington, and of course, you cannot justify going into a war, okay, against people who have done nothing to you, right? And here comes September 11, okay? Here comes September 11. I don't want to go into the details of September 11. I can be 2 more hours about this because there are many questions that you can raise about September 11. But let's assume the narrative as it is, okay? That supposedly there were these Muslims in a cave of Afghanistan that were planning this, and then they destroy these buildings, etc. Let's take it for granted, okay? So suddenly after that, you could see, there's many questions about this. If you see the documentary, most of you have seen Zero, an investigation to 911, stuff like that. Well, there are many question marks, okay, about what happened. But that's another discussion. But the point is, whatever happened that day, this was a turning point in the way they were able now to justify what was already put in place by Mr. Huntington. So now we're being attacked. These are our enemies. It's no joke. There's no speculation. Clash of civilization, right? And so then we go into clash of civilization, right? And then we go into this warfare in many parts of Muslim majority countries, destruction of countries, the killing of millions of human beings. They don't call that terrorism. They call that, collateral damage, no? Because they're supposedly fighting the terrorists, right? But then they kill millions of people. And this is not terrorism, right? So the definition of terrorism here is really very corrupted because terrorism, it doesn't account for state terrorism, okay? And so, anyway, so the point is that now we are in the middle of a process that not only they are, on the one hand, Islamophobic discourses deployed as part of organizing principle of the military budget now of the USA is like way, beyond what they ever dreamed during the Cold War. And now this is a never-ending war because this is like war on terror. What the hell is this? It just go forever. There's no beginning or end. This is forever, okay? As long as they want to keep it. So this is a moment where at the same time, you have, on the other hand, a problem in terms of the crisis of identity of the West, because there is also a decline of the West relative to all the emerging economies in other parts of the world, okay? So suddenly you have also, let's put it this way, a decline because of the civil rights struggles, because of the, anti-imperialist movement, because of the, different defeats, the defeat in Vietnam, the defeat, etc. Suddenly you have the financial crisis, the decline in the status of many of the white middle classes in America, etc. You go over the list, and suddenly you have here a serious identity crisis in terms of who we are, where are we going, what happened to me. I'm supposed to be, a white middle class. I work hard, etc. What is it that I'm losing my home, etc., etc. No? So suddenly you have here Islamophobia coming in to also restructure not only the budget of the state, but also restructure what Salman has been describing here as stripping out citizens of their rights, consenting to it. That is where now, because of the Islamic threat, right? Because of the war on terror, then you create a situation, a political context, where you are now reorganizing also the whole field of legal rights, the whole field of politics, the whole field, etc. So now, if you think about this as organizing principle, this is organizing principle of not only the budget of states, but also the regulation about citizenship rights and stripping out citizenship rights, where now they consent themselves to it. Now you don't need to impose it by force, but people themselves giving up rights in the name of security, right? And then suddenly we are moving into kind of police state situations in many parts of the world, okay, in the name of war on terror, right? And then you have, in a sense, a situation where the decline of the West, this Islamophobia discourse is, in a sense, stripping citizens away from their rights and, in a sense, restructuring the possibilities for Western economies to try to compete back in the war economy with China and other superpowers. Because why? You're pauperizing also your own population by stripping their rights out. You know, so there is a process here of also pauperization of population that is also self-serving to the competition in the international arena with China, rise of China and other emerging economies, okay? So, and then you have, of course, the gendering Islamophobia, because then you know that the target of a lot of these, you know, violent attacks, etc., is women with a hijab. This image of the woman with hijab becomes the target or the image, no, that is deployed in many places to, in a sense, justify Islamophobic discourses. And now you have, in the left, progressive racism, that I am progressive, I am against the Muslims because look at how the woman dress, look at how the woman, and then you have this Islamophobic white feminist discourse deployed in the name of some progressive cause to really, come up with a justification or a discourse to dismiss other forms of feminism, other forms of women's rights struggle, and play in the hands of white male imperial power against a brown man, okay? And remember, that was the justification used by George Bush in the invasion of Afghanistan. You know, we need to save brown woman from brown man. And suddenly George Bush, who was all alone, okay, eliminating and stripping women in the USA from their rights, suddenly he became a feminist, right? To invade Afghanistan. But anyway, I'm saying this because Islamophobia has multiple dimensions, and it has the dimensions of how this is becoming a kind of restructuring of many things for the West to try to catch up with its own decline, right? And now in the level of the economy, at the level of the politics, at the level of the rights, at the level of, and epistemic Islamophobia, which is also important for who talks about Islam, who is authorized to talk about Islam. And then Islamic thinkers critical of what is going on, then inferiorize in relation to their knowledge production. And you have a few pundits in the West talking, in the name of Islam, who happen to be a part of the machine of, war making and oppression of Muslims domestically and internationally. So I'll stop here. Thank you.